There's an African proverb that goes something like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The Paris Agreement was developed in that spirit, that 195 nations and territories can do more to protect our planet from climate change, the greatest environmental challenge of our lifetime, than the United States or any country could do isolated or on its own. Nearly 200 countries now have agreed to do their part to limit global temperature rise by developing national plans to reduce their own emissions. And we know that climate change is a global challenge that does not respect national borders. Emissions anywhere affect people everywhere, and with the poorest and most vulnerable populations affected the most. And there is a reason we call it global warming. We know that no one country, no one region, no one continent can solve this problem alone. But President Trump's inner circle has a different take on this historical agreement. For instance, during an appearance on Fox and Friends last month, Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator, denounced the Paris Agreement, calling it, quote, a bad deal for America, close quote. Asked about his biggest objection to the accord, this is what he said. He claimed that China and India had no obligation until 2030, no obligation until 2030, even though, quote, they are polluting far more than we are, close quote. Well, that's just false. First, in 2015, the United States, on a per capita basis, produced more than double the carbon dioxide emissions of China, more than double, and 8 times more than India. Also, contrary to what the administrator continues to espouse, both China and India have pledged to reach their carbon emission reduction goals by 2030, reach those goals by 2030, which means they're taking steps now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, not 13 years from now, to meet those commitments. India is on schedule to be the world's 3rd largest solar market by the end of 2017. In fact, last year, India was unveiled the largest solar power facility in the world. Meanwhile, Chinese leaders have ordered their country's coal companies to cut 1.3 million jobs over the next 5 years. And some of these workers will find jobs in the clean energy sector, which Beijing expects to generate more than 13 million jobs by 2020. Make no mistake, the United States cedes its leadership position on climate change. China is ready and willing to assume that role, our role. And in doing so, they will move ahead and we will fall behind. It is just that simple. We have a chart here that includes a quote from China's top climate negotiator, and he told Reuters, this would have been about 6 months ago, we told Reuters, if Trump abandons the efforts to implement the Paris Agreement, here's what he said: China's influence and voice are likely to increase in global climate governance, which will then spill over into other areas of global governance and increase China's global standing, power, and leadership. The Chinese clearly understand that the Paris Agreement affords their country, the opportunity to emerge as a 21st century clean energy superpower. I've been there. A year ago I was there. And in the trains that they built, the train systems that they built, and the huge electric buses, all electric buses that I rode, it's clear that they know what they're doing, and their intent is to eat our lunch by pursuing this clean energy, sustainable energy approach. Unfortunately, those in the Trump administration seem to be the only ones who don't recognize that. And someday they'll wish they had. The rest of us will wish we had too. Withdrawing from this pact doesn't put America first, it puts America behind. But you don't have to take my word for it, just ask our business community. They see the clear benefits for their businesses and for America if we continue to play a lead role in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Over 1,000 companies, American companies and investors, some of which are represented here on this chart, have written to President Trump urging his administration, and him to address climate change through the implementation of the Paris Agreements. The businesses, which include Exxon, Starbucks, Apple, General Mills, Walmart, Nike, Morgan Stanley, and BP, just to name a few, wrote that failure, this is what they said, this is what all these companies and their leaders said, failure to embrace the Paris Accord, quote, puts American prosperity at risk, but the right action now will create jobs and boost U.S. competitiveness, close quote. I think we have another chart here, at least one more. Back in, we had two letters here. One that was written to a new president, President Obama, in 2009. And again, one of those full-page ads. There's another one that appeared more recently, like within the past week or so, to another new president, in this case, President Trump. And interestingly enough, back in 2009, a Manhattan businessman named Donald J. Trump agreed with those companies I mentioned earlier, the 1,000 companies that said we ought to do something about climate change, we ought to get on board and lead the way. But businessman Donald J. Trump agreed with him and actually joined fellow CEOs to run an ad in the New York Times, just get to see it right here, urging then President Obama to, quote, lead the world by example, close quote, ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen. In the ad right here, Donald Trump called on President Obama to allow the United States of America to, quote, to serve in modeling the change necessary to protect humanity and our planet. 8 years later, the person who signed this letter and joined all these other CEOs in saying, President Obama, wake up, let's do something about this climate change stuff, get in line, make sure that we're leading the parade. 8 years later, he's not signing the letter, he's the addressee on the letter. From, again, hundreds of CEOs from around the country, and they're urging him to do the very same thing that Donald Trump joined in urging Barack Obama to do 8 years earlier. If you ever want to think of something that's ironic, or find an example of two full-page ads that sort of represent the term irony, this is it. This is it. Well, the companies noted in this second full-page ad that the Paris Agreement provides just the kind of framework that we need. So U.S. businesses still recognize that our country leading the world in addressing climate change is the right approach. And one might ask, why doesn't our president, Donald Trump, realize that? Mr. President, with the Paris Agreement, the global community rightly recognized that there are challenges bigger than any one state and came together to do what is best for our collective future. It's not the first time the global community came together for the greater good. In 1944, the world came together at the Convention on International Civil Aviation to regulate international air travel so that planes could avoid flying into one another in the not-so-friendly skies of the future. In 1968, the Non-Proliferation Treaty helped prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and further the goal of disarmament to help keep our world safe. And then in 1997, the Chemical Weapons Convention outlawed the production, the stockpiling, and the use of chemical weapons, which the world agreed were inhumane. On these critical issues, the world came together overwhelmingly to do what was in the best interest of humanity rather than the best interest of one single nation. But even these other historic and frankly common sense agreements don't have as many signers as the Paris Agreement has. We hear numbers thrown around a lot when we talk about the Paris Agreement, but to put the number of signers in context, let me just say that's nearly the whole world. Nearly the whole world. And if you wonder what does 195 national flags look like, pretty much the whole world, that's it. There's two down here that have not signed. And one of those is Nicaragua. And they didn't sign because they thought that the Paris Accords didn't go far enough. The other signer, the other country that didn't sign on is Syria. Syria. So, in effect, there's really only one country that's refused to accept the basis, if you will, of the agreement. This huge Paris Accords, one nation, and that is Syria. And our withdrawing leaves the United States in company with Bashar al-Assad. We would be his wingman, Assad. That's not the company we ought to be keeping, and that's not who we are, Mr. President. When it comes to global challenges such as terrorism and cyber attacks, the United States doesn't sit back and wait for someone else to lead. We lead. America leads the way. We always have. It's part of the fabric of our nation. To win our freedom, we took on the mightiest nation on earth at the time, England, not once but twice, and beat them. A half-century later, we survived a bloody civil war that took hundreds of thousands of lives and left hundreds of thousands more crippled and wounded. After that war, our president was assassinated and his successor, Andrew Johnson, was impeached. Somehow, we survived all of that. We went on to lead our allies to victory in World War I and World War II. We led the world out of the Great Depression and to victory in the Cold War as well. America should once again be leading the world to combat what is likely to be the greatest challenge we will face in our lifetime. Our children and their children are counting on this, and we should not let them down. Somebody said to me, how long would it take to read a list of 195 nations that have signed on to the Paris Accords? And I got the names right here, Mr. President. I'm not sure I can correctly pronounce all the names. I'm going to do maybe page 1 and maybe the last page, and we'll leave it at that. But it starts off with Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Andorra, Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Barbados. That's the first page. And it goes on and on and on. And we finish up with Turkmenistan, Tuvalu, Uganda, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States of America, Uruguay, Uzbekistan, Vanuatu, Venezuela, Vietnam, Yemen, Zambia, Zimbabwe. 195 in all. We ought to be in company with the names of all the countries that are on that list. We should not be in the company of the one that was down here by itself, Syria.